Welcome ladies and gentlemen. Let's have a look at this Yamaha XJR 1300 SP back from 2001. The most iconic Japanese big inline 4 bike. The competition made much better performing motorcycles above 1000cc, but in my opinion the XJR 1300 SP is one of the two most beautiful Japanese big bikes ever built. It's an homage to the racing superbikes of the 1970s and 80s, beamed into the 2000s. The motorbike version of a muscle car. I'll show you the motorcycle and some of its functionalities. Let's have a look. The XJR 1300 was introduced in the year 1999. Its predecessor, the XJR 1200, was already on the market since 1994. It was introduced to compete with other big volume naked bikes such as Honda's CB1000. Japanese big bikes usually have an inline 4-cylinder motor, are heavy and have a chain drive. So does the XJR. The bulky motor is attracting every rider's looks and is dominating the bike's characteristics. It stems from the FJ1200, which was a sports touring bike introduced in 1984 with a 1100cc engine. Yamaha managed to keep this motor going until 2016, despite great restrictions in emission standards. This is almost a third of a century. The exposed air and oil-cooled motor adds to the style of the XJR, giving it the classic look, and is a standalone mark against its rivals. The cool dual shocks in the rear do the rest. This bike guarantees for a smooth ride for you and your pillion. Effortlessly, the motorcycle lets you overtake, even with added weight, and it can be moved around in a sporty fashion, although one has to be careful in the corners. Dual shocks are not state of the art anymore, and if you want to save your bank account from horrendous amounts of gas bills, you should as well stay on the cruising side of life when it comes to your riding style. Start the XJR, put it into top gear and let your left hand rest for the rest of the ride while you let the air hit your face effortlessly. The design of the XJR 1300 was mostly taken from its predecessor, the XJR 1200, which was itself designed as a mix from bikes from the past. To me, this only concerns the front part of it. The rear part of the bike looks more like a 90s style bike. The seating position is very upright and comfortable, at least for an average sized person as I am. I'm 1 meter 75 centimeters tall. This bike here is the SP version, which is a limited version with better rear shocks, different seat and a special paint scheme. You can tell by SP paint scheme design what year a bike is from. The XJRs from 2015 on had a different, more modern look, still using the same motor. In most years the motor was painted black, only from 1999 to 2001 it came in silver, like this one. My bike has crash bars from the previous owner still on it, and first I didn't like them optically, but they are neat to rest your feet in a different riding position on longer rides. The dashboard is very simple, showing you the revs, the speed and fuel capacity. That is mostly it. There is no temperature gauge on the entire bike. It never overheated when I had it, but it is weird not having it. Even bikes from the 80s did. There are aftermarket temperature gauges for your Oil Pro port available though. Be careful with the fuel gauge. The tank seems to empty very slowly for the first 2 quarters, only to plummet down from there. Rather take the first gas station once it's half empty if you're in a less populated area. Until 2007, the XJR was carbureted, and here is the lever for cold starts. A quick tip which lets it start every time. Press the ignition button once without the lever engaged and let the engine spin for a second. Then do it again with the lever all the way down and it will start, at least in my case. Otherwise, you got your lights, horn and kill switch over here, all very basic according to the motto of the bike. Here we have a hydraulic clutch, a cable operated throttle and hydraulic brakes. The front brakes in the SP are from the R1 of the time, so good stopping power from the race group. But be aware, the R1 was never a 250 kg bike and the brakes will wear if you ride like a lunatic. The 4-piston caliper front brakes are strong and necessary, whilst the 2-caliper rear brake is more of an accessory in regular braking, but it helps maneuver the heavy bike easily at low speeds. Road contact is managed by a 17-inch 120mm front tire and a 17-inch 180mm rear tire. The wheelbase is 1.5 meters with a 65% steering angle. The motor is a 1251cc air-cooled inline-4 dual overhead cam engine with 4 valves per cylinder. It is carbureted by 4 Mikuni BS36 carburetors. And it still uses the traditional motor airbox constellation with pretty much upright standing cylinders and the airbox behind the motor. This is good for air cooling, although there is a small radiator for oil cooling as well. Since most of the weight sits in the front, the bike is rather front heavy, but it still feels planted. The maximum power output of the XJR 1300 is rated at 98 horsepower or 72 kilowatt at 8000 RPM and the max torque at 92 Nm at 6250 RPM. With a carburetor dynojet kit you can get to the numbers of 125 horsepower and torque into the 110s of Newton meters. So if you check the internet, the torque curve of such an XJR hits the 100 Newton meter mark at around 3000 RPM. A modern 4-cylinder sports bike gets you about half of that at 3000 RPM. So it pulls from the start and that's a good feeling. Generally, this motor has a very good longevity. There are people who did over 115,000 kilometers or 72,000 miles on them. They just did the normal servicing and fixed on broken drivetrains. The entire motorcycle is a beast, which is noted in the weight of the XJR as well. This motorcycle weighs 253 kilograms or 558 pounds wet. The fuel capacity is 21 liters. The reserve takes 4 liters. You have to manually switch the valve into reserve. The gas consumption is 6.7 liters per 100 kilometers by the manufacturer, which in my case is a slight understatement. I would say 7 to 8 liters are more accurate if you push it a bit. The XJR got a 5-gear transmission, chain drive and a wet clutch. This bike got a beautiful 4-in-2 exhaust. In 2002 the dual exhaust system was replaced with a 4-in-1, saving 6 kilograms in weight. The guy I have this bike from was in his 50s and he took the restrictors out of the exhaust, which made it sound like madness. It was pure joy to rev it. Unfortunately I had to weld them back on in order to conform with the law. Yamaha used a steel cradle frame for his motorcycle, which adds to the weight. The XJR has no ride rates at all. The long wheelbase gives it excellent stability, and the adjustable Y-power front teleforks on my XJR are rather soft at times, even if fully adjusted. The factory ones must be even worse. The rear shocks are not adjustable. The response from the road is pretty poor and probably the biggest downside to the bike if you come from a sports bike world. But that is not what you should look for when you're in the game for such a bike. It delivers a super smooth ride. It is like driving your couch, with the difference that this looks much cooler. The slow speed handling of the bike is very good, but when the motor is off it turns into a heavy chunk of metal. It accelerates in 3.6 seconds from 0 to 100, which is only possible if you go in a straight line. The mirrors on this bike are okay and they do the job. Vibrations from the motor are very limited. I never got numb hands riding the bike. The riding feels is in the way that you feel more on than in the bike when riding, like a lot of older bikes. So they get this old school bike feeling again. The stability of the bike is good, but you better start braking a bit earlier in the corners. The seat height is 775 millimeters or 30.5 inches. Depending on the seat, is thick for both rider and pillion, and the seating position is quite upright, but you can ride it in a sporty way. I'm 1.75 meters tall and it suits me quite well. You can certainly take day trips on this bike, but you need a luggage box if you want to be comfy. There is plenty of storage space under the seat and there are hooks for luggage straps as well. Beginners should step away from the XJR. The problem is handling of such heavy bikes. For beginners I would recommend light nakeds under 300cc for example. Let's talk about problems with this model. The biggest complaint from owners is the paint flaking off the motor and forks. It seems bikes from 2004 make more problems. Oil level sensors can be stuck, which is solved by regular maintenance. If the bike has carbs, make sure they are adjusted properly. Services are easy to do because of the engine positioning. The service intervals are 10,000 kilometers. These bikes are not expensive to own from a servicing point of view. Insurance can be higher because of the displacement. The prices for decent used models in Switzerland sit between 5,000 and 6,000 Swiss francs for the SP version. The base version probably sells for 1,000 less, and the XJR 1200 goes for even less than that, which makes it range at the bottom range of used race bikes. There are quite a few of them around still, so they are cheap to buy. Since this bike configuration is not made anymore, it will probably rise in value again in the next years as a collector's item. Regardless, it is a wonderful cruiser for the people who don't want to get a Harley nor one of the muscle cruisers around, but rather want to have an upright seating position and performance on tap. Let's listen to the engine for a moment. It purrs like a crocodile. Alright, let's make sure the bike is in neutral. It's not cold, so I can start it normally. Let's move over here. effortlessly. That is the motto of this bike. Pack your backpack, take your helmet, hop on and go places effortlessly. That's it. Thanks for watching, and as always, ride safe, my friends.